So let me start by saying what a pleasure to be here. A little bit by accident giving this talk. I was telling Peter last night that I was looking forward very much to hearing what Dave had to say. And now I'm giving his talk, so I hope he's happy with what I'm going to say. But I want to give you a little snapshot of what's happening in the U.S. And one of the reasons, especially for transportation, and one of the, I think, very reasons, but also big benefits of my being here is to look for opportunities to collaborate. So as Peter mentioned, I'm director of the Joint Center for Energy Storage Research, which is just finishing its first 5 years. We are hoping to be renewed for a second 5 years, and we expect to be. But this leaves lots of opportunities to do some collaborative battery, or at least cooperative battery research over the next 5 years that we would like to develop here and in the near future. So let me start by showing you the 3 areas in the Department of Energy that do battery research. So the left one, fundamental research, is at the top of the box. That's the Office of Science. And it's really based, the current phrase is early stage basic research to understand the fundamentals, the phenomena, and the materials, not so much to make systems, but to enable much better systems to be made in the near term, 5 to 10 years. So you see 3 boxes at the bottom. J. Caesar, that's what I represent. It's an organization of about 20 institutions and 150 people spread over the entire country, which we have very fortunately been able to coordinate nicely to think with one mind and to execute one strategy. And there's a bit of luck and a bit of talent to doing that. Then the EFRC's, Energy Frontier Research Centers, they're smaller funding units of anywhere from $2 to $4 million each. They typically involve 2 or 3 institutions, and they go after a narrower set of fundamental problems. And then the core scientific research, which is typically groups of 3 or 4, or maybe 5 or 6 people, all at the same institution. In the middle, you see transformational research. That's ARPA-E, which has been in business for a bit more than 5 years. It's high-risk transformational research, so this is not basic science, but it's very strongly innovative at the technology level. So implementing systems that haven't been thought of before. Transportation and energy storage are very important in their portfolio. They do other things as well. On the right, the applied research, and this is what Dave Howell represents, so energy efficiency and renewable energy, EERE, and in particular the Vehicle Technologies Office, so advanced batteries for automotive applications, something that's only about a year or maybe a year and a half old, the Battery 500 Consortium, USABC, which is another much older organization within DOE, and you see 2 of the things that they're looking at very strongly there at the bottom, extreme fast charging, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, and recycling of lithium-ion batteries, which I think everyone agrees we have to do, especially if EVs are going to take off at the scale that we expect them to. So a little bit about oil dependency in the U.S. Some interesting facts at the top. Transportation is responsible for 70% of U.S. petroleum usage in 2016. 86% of the transportation fuel is for on-road vehicles, so not airplanes or ships. And there were about 250 million light-duty vehicles on the road in the States. And some other numbers there. The interesting one is the second one, 10 to 15 years to turn over the fleet. That's a lifetime of a car. That limits how fast you can change the system. So most people will not sell their car until it's worn out and they're ready to buy a new one. And that's actually a rather long time constant. It's very different from cell phones, for example, which took over in the space of 10 years. If you remember back 10 or 15 years ago and compare it with today. So by fuel in the year 2000 and in the year 2016, on the left, the year 2000, mostly petroleum, a tiny bit of natural gas, that's the green. Biomass is really hard to see, but it's just to the right, and electricity almost non-existent. In 2016, petroleum has shrunk, natural gas has grown, partly because it's so available in the States due to shale gas. Biomass has grown dramatically, and there's a little tiny sliver, which you may not be able to make out, exactly at 12 o'clock. That thin blue line is electric vehicles, and that's the thing that we're all hoping is going to grow very much more. Here's the market. So maybe on the left, look there first, domestic EV manufacturing. PEV, that refers to anything you can plug in, so it could be including hybrids. So hybrids and things you can plug in, and so plug-in hybrids, and also pure electric vehicles. And you see some sales numbers there. And here are the best-selling models. Tesla has 2 of them. Chevy has 2 of them. Prius has always been there. They were, of course, the pioneer. And Nissan Leaf and Ford Fusion are there. 70% of the US sold EVs were manufactured in the US. And that's, of course, a goal for economic growth. And all 7 of the top sellers were, in fact, manufactured there. Another important feature, we heard a little bit this morning about this from Joan, about 260,000 manufacturing jobs are associated with electrification. So that's expected to grow in 2030 to maybe 600,000. So a very important societal reason for driving this transformation. Some of the technical things that DOE has done, especially in the EERE program that Dave represents, lithium-ion battery tech-to-market highlights. There have been a couple of decades or maybe more of research here. One of the very important things that has come out are new cathodes for lithium-ion batteries that involve nickel, manganese, and cobalt that significantly raise the operating voltage and the capacity of the cathode, and that raises the energy density. So these things are critical, really, for getting the range up. And this technology that was developed in the EERE side now appears in all of these cars. So it's really had an impact, and as we were hearing earlier today, it's got a ways to go. So if we want EVs to really take over at a huge penetration of 75%, let's say, or even more, we need to have better batteries. And performance is one of the things that is really going to count. As we heard in the last talk, thanks to Jorge and also earlier, Joan, that EV battery R&D also impacts grid or stationary storage market. So we've heard about the big project in Australia that Tesla did. There are lots of other things listed here by LG Chem, Saft, and A123. And we're starting to see the penetration of big-scale battery installations on the grid, which outside of San Diego, Aliso Canyon in the States, are now taking the place of peaker plants. These have been in operation about a year. It was in January of 2017 that these big batteries started to replace peaker plants. So we have a year of experience. We'll see how it goes. This may be the beginning of a new era where batteries can, in fact, be proven to take on the tasks usually done by peaker plants. Interesting about the cost. The cost has to come down. So electric vehicles are still too expensive. The Chevy Volt and the Tesla Model 3 are meant to sell for about $35,000 in the States. That's about the median price of a new car, and you might expect that they would appeal to about half the market for that reason. Actually, the appeal may be a bit smaller because they don't perform in all ways as well as a gasoline engine does. In particular, they don't go as far, although 200 miles seems to be enough for almost everyone, but they don't charge very fast. So I can fill up my car. I have a 4-cylinder Honda, which gets 400 miles to the tank, and I can fill the tank in 5 minutes. It takes much longer than that to charge, and that will be the subject of the next slide. But the cost has to come down. So here's some data, plots, projections. of various next generation batteries, either lithium ion or beyond lithium ion. There are 4 listed here. What they would cost at maturity when all the problems are solved and it's in full production. So these are maybe optimistic, but you can look at some numbers here starting at around $130 a kilowatt hour for a high voltage graphite anode battery, which is not unlike what we have today. Put in some silicon into the anode, that's the blue line. Use lithium metal for the anode, that's the third line there. And the yellow is a lithium sulfur battery. And you can see the prices are expected to come down to at least the level of $100 a kilowatt hour. The status today, the cost is about $219 per kilowatt hour, and that's an 80% reduction since 2008. But the goal has to be even more aggressive, so reduce the cost of EV battery packs to less than $100 a kilowatt hour, increase the range to 300 miles instead of the present 200, and decrease the charging time to 15 minutes or less, and that's a very, very aggressive goal. These are some of the players. You can see from their logos there are quite a few players involved. And at the bottom, the keystone projects, lithium metal anode with a high nickel, manganese, cobalt cathode, that's one project. Lithium metal anode with a sulfur cathode, a second project. And then the electrode cell architecture, maybe you could change that dramatically. That's a third project. So here's an interesting graph showing the effect of fast charging on miles driven. So how much of a risk are you willing to take when you drive your electric car that you won't run out of juice halfway through your journey? So at the top, you see the kinds of charging that can happen. These are all fast chargers. DC fast charger, 2 hours to get 200 miles of charge. And that's, of course, much shorter than ordinary AC charging you might do at home, which could take 4 to 6 hours. The Tesla supercharger, and you see the wattage there, 140 kilowatts, 25 minutes, and extreme fast charging, 400 kilowatts in 10 to 15 minutes. Of course, the extreme fast charging can be harmful to the battery, and you wouldn't want to do it routinely, but you could certainly do it occasionally. So the bottom graph shows for fast charging, it's a little hard to read, but here is if no one fast charged, so you charge at home, these are the vehicle miles driven, about 8,000, and this is the number of vehicles that do that. So this reflects reality at the moment. If only 1% of the vehicles do fast charging, then suddenly the vehicle miles driven goes up. And this is 5%, 10%, 15%, 25%, 50%, and greater than 50%. So you can see that the ability to fast charge affects people's psychology. They're willing to go farther if they have fast charging. This is extreme fast charging. So a new report, which is just out, and there's the URL, enabling fast charging, a technology gap assessment. What do we need to do to get there? It's both a gap on the battery side and on the charging side. And at the top right, you see a few pictures of what can happen with extreme fast charging. Plating on the anode when you charge, and this can be quite harmful. The bottom is the cost impact. Obviously, if you can carry higher currents, you can get the same power with less material, and that drives the cost down, so there's an added benefit there. This is the recycling challenge, and I think everyone agrees that indeed the recycling challenge is real, and maybe it's here now. Most of our cell phone batteries, which are lithium ion, are not recycled. They end up on landfills somewhere, often in Southeast Asia, after the copper has been taken out in ways that may not be totally safe for the humans doing it. And that really has to change, because the capacity of an EV battery will be much bigger, the market will be much bigger, the cost will be much higher for that battery, for the car. And in fact, now It's a significant percentage of the price of an EV. So if you recycle, you accomplish several things. You don't need as much lithium, you don't need as much cobalt for the battery because you're getting some of it from recycled batteries. You might drive the cost down if you can find a way to do it cost effectively. You'll have to take less of these, what might be called critical materials, out of the ground. So the bigger problem, so lead acid is the example. Now in the States, it says 98%. I think it's actually better than 99% of lead acid batteries are recycled. And it turns out it's cheaper to get the lead from recycled batteries than it is to mine it out of the ground. That's one of the drivers. Another driver is it's mandated because lead is toxic. We don't want that in the environment. And we have to get to that point with lithium ion. So the big problem with lithium ion now, it's illustrated by this chart. There are lots of materials in it. So the middle is the lead acid battery, the cathode, and various other components, mostly lead. For a lithium ion battery, there are many, many more elements involved and compounds that have to be recycled. So we really don't know how to do that well yet. This is one of the areas that Faraday will be looking at. It's actually one of the areas that Argonne is also looking at, sensing that there's an opportunity now. The moment is ripe. These are some of the advantages here at the bottom of battery recycling, which we've already mentioned. So this is a challenge that's going on now. So the key points of what I have told you and what Dave would have told you. Economic and energy impact. Electrification can help drive economic development and leadership in a global and increasingly competitive transportation industry. Of course, every country would like to be the leader. I think with Faraday Institute and with things like J. Caesar, we're much more to the basic science side. That's an area, it's pre-competitive, so that's an area where we can share and maybe accelerate the progress in both countries. The VTO 500 battery R&D is looking for robust and affordable lithium-ion battery technology, and it's maybe opening the door to widespread deployment for EVs. The next generation lithium battery technology has the potential for a breakthrough. So let's go beyond lithium-ion. Let's make a step change in either cost or in performance, and that would dramatically accelerate the deployment. So that's what I have to say. We'll have some questions a little bit later. Thank you very much.